Thanks, Jan and Pat. Okay, now we're coming to the point in our program where we have our speaker, Dr. Daniel Gullo. But before I introduce him, I want to point out a piece of news that occurred, very big piece of news in the museum community this last week. I don't know if you've heard of it, but in Brazil, the National Museum burned massively. Like 90% of this 20 million piece collection, they figure, is gone. And when we hear about those kinds of things in the museum field, it just, makes our heart break, because this stuff is so important that has been saved. And they're still going through the wreckage and trying to figure out what has been saved, what might be in a different museum or location, and just what is completely destroyed. And this is why what our speaker does is so important. So our program is called Saving Endangered Manuscripts. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Daniel Gullo, who is the Joseph S. Micallef Curator of the Malta Study Center at the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library at St. John's University. And just a small personal point of reference, this happens to be his birthday weekend, so Monday is his birthday, so you can give him birthday wishes once he's done speaking. But please welcome Dr. Daniel Gullo, and we'll do a little bit of setting up here before he starts.
And then give me a deadline.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, there are some beverages over here too, if you'd like to
Hi everybody, I'm John. I'm the winemaker guy. Yeah, just want to thank everybody for showing up and coming out here today. Wish the wind wasn't blowing so hard, but at least we got a 72 sunshine. That's not bad. It's not bad. Anyway, just want to thank you all for coming. If it's your first time here, come see us again next season. This is our last sampling day of the year, but we are open for bottle sales year round. I just want to maybe call ahead to make sure that someone's here to take care of you. But again, thanks for coming. And if anybody's got any questions about the winery or the vineyard, I'd be happy to entertain those at this time. Yes.
John, do you want to tell them about your olive oil?
Oh, I probably should.
Yeah.
I also import about 20 different gourmet olive oils and about 20 different balsamic vinegars, and I bottle them under my brand mark here at the farm. And those are available for sale year-round. And if anybody would like menu or a list of all the varieties that we have, like I said, we got about 40 total. And some really fun flavors like jalapeno lime and blueberry and basil infused olive oil and just a lot of good stuff. So if you'd like menus of those, the servers would be happy to drop them by the tables. Okay? Again, thanks again, and enjoy the day.
Because of the sunlight, if you're having difficulty seeing, please feel free to move forward.
All right, can everybody hear me, or should I use the microphone? Use the microphone. Okay. All right. Thank you all. Thank you all for this wonderful invitation on a beautiful day today. And I know that the screen is a bit faded because of the beautiful weather that we have here today in September, and it's just never really want to ask for rain and clouds, but maybe today a little bit of clouds would have been nice, but I can't complain. I do have, on the other hand, some handouts that Anne-Marie is bringing that'll slowly move their way around. At least those will show the richness of some of the things that I'll be talking about in a more direct way, and that'll allow you to see some of the activities and other efforts that we're doing more kind of tangibly and with you while we're talking about it. Before I begin the major lecture, I just want to have a very brief moment to give a bit of an encomium to local historical societies. I'm a historian by training. I finished my doctorate back in 2008, 2009, and I work on a lot of local history, albeit in Spain. Like you here, there are societies across the world that are dedicated to preserving historical culture. And it's very crucial for us to do our own work, not only as professional historians, but also local and regional historians to maintain this. And so it's very important for me to be here to acknowledge the type of work that you're doing. And secondly, I want to acknowledge Lucy Jones, who's at some of my Friends of the Malta Study Center committee, and I'll be seeing her at our annual board meeting in 2 weeks. And her family has not only been important here in Minnesota for the preservation of history and historical societies, but also abroad. In fact, it was her family that helped found the Conservation Center in Malta for the preservation of the local parish archives located around the island. And so their efforts are not only regional but international, and I think it's important to recognize that, that this family has been doing so much for so long to help preserve the patrimony of Minnesota, but also of the rest of the world. So, just thank you. I kind of want to begin right where... Yeah. I want to begin kind of right... It's kind of a faded picture. This is actually a nice, unfortunate picture of the museum in Brazil. Over 20 million objects were destroyed, and not just simply objects that involved Native American art, but also specimens. It was a natural history museum, and it's completely gone. And when I was watching this week, it was a stark reminder that even the work that I do in Malta, the facilities are the same. They lack fire control, they lack modern work to preserve these from an architectural standpoint, and it's in a major earthquake zone. And as I was looking at this today, I was thinking, if you can go to the next slide for me real quick. It's hard to see, but this is actually an aerial shot from a drone looking at the inside of the museum, and it's completely gutted and lost. And I was thinking not just simply about the patrimony of the scientific community is lost, but almost 250 years of scholarship was also lost in this blaze. The research notes, the early notes, the manuscript notes of these explorers of the Amazon are now gone, completely gone, that had never been transcribed and never microfilmed, never digitized, and lost to humanity forever. And as I was watching this unfold and talking to my friends in Malta that have similar style buildings and similar problems, I was reminded of the origin of the Hill Museum Manuscript Library, which has existed now for over 50 years. And what you have here on this picture here is something which is really important to understand what the Hill Museum Manuscript Library is and why it came to existence here in Minnesota. And this is a picture of Monte Cassino here on the left as it appeared in 1941. And on the right, it's been completely destroyed in 1944 due to the bombing raids of the 8th Air Force in World War II, which mistakenly believed that the Germans had put in both anti-aircraft and artillery batteries in the monastery as the Allies were moving up the peninsula. Fortunately, in this particular instance, all of the books had been removed, but all of the rest of the art and architecture had been completely destroyed. I bring this up because the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library is located at a Benedictine monastery at St. John's University, and it was founded by two Benedictines, Barry Coleman and also Father Oliver Kapsner. And they both served in World War II, and they had been priests serving in the army, helping the troops, and they had seen firsthand the destruction of what took place for the cultural communities in Europe. And during the 1960s, when things were rather unstable in the world, they thought to themselves, wouldn't it be a very good idea, again, to go to Europe and to think about preserving the culture of humanity in case something happens? And it should be known at this time, because of the way that the Iron Curtain was set up, and with the West and NATO, that there were areas of the world that this could simply take place. And one of those primary zones was in Austria and Germany, because Austria had just left being a fully occupied country after World War II from the Allies and become independent, but it had yet to join NATO. And so it was a kind of a perfect invasion route to go through it. The Hill Museum and Manuscript Library therefore began with this idea of first going and preserving Benedictine culture, but then quickly merged into an organization dedicated to preserving the world manuscript culture. And seeing that connection between our local history here in Minnesota and also the national, international history is very important to understand who we are. I say that because the photo here from 2017 is the library of the University of Mosul, located in northwestern Iraq. The library has been completely destroyed. In fact, this is a picture of what one could call its third destruction within 4 years. It had first received substantial damage during the invasions of in the Second Iraqi War. Then it received substantial damage from its occupation by ISIL or ISIS, which occupied the university and burnt the library from the inside. And then, unfortunately, it was bombed again by Allied forces. And the reason why if you could see the picture a little bit longer, like bright light on the inside, is a direct 500-pound bomb went through the ceiling to incinerate the last of the university library collection. It's an example of what can happen so quickly and so fast in an area of the world that may be vulnerable to damage. Do the next one. This is in Timbuktu. It's a library in Mali where very large libraries dating back to the 14th century exist, because Timbuktu, although now a regional center, was the center of the Malian kingdoms at the time. During the 2014-2015, it suffered a major rebellion from the north to the south, both indigenous and Islamic in nature. And it ended up destroying a small part of the collection because the families were smart enough to know what was going to happen, and they transported nearly 400,000 manuscripts from Timbuktu to Bamako. The Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, like in Iraq, has been photographing these manuscripts because they're now in a place that's been removed from their traditional home, which is a largely desert climate well suited for manuscript preservation, to a hotly humid environment in secret locations, just in case the rebellion flares up again, to be destroyed. That could lead to their destruction. These types of activities that we're doing also have a historical importance. Back in the 1970s and 1980s, we did our microfilming work in Germany. And if we think about these kind of remote, less wealthy nations suffering both from internal conflict, but also from neglect from an environmental standpoint within museums and fire control. This is the collapse of the Cologne State Archives, which took place in 2009, where we had done microfilming. The entire archives was destroyed, and if not for our microfilming of their medieval and early modern collections, we would have no record of what existed in that particular archive. From the standpoint of Malta, we have been doing work in Malta since 1973, and again, we're primarily going there to see what could take place. In the upper part, it's too bad you can't see it. This is where Lucy Jones' family comes into play. What you would see here is a large section of nearly, I think it's about 7,000 volumes of notarial and local archives of Malta held in the cathedral, all on the damp cement floor where they had been preserved for over 200 years. And the Weyerhaeuser family actually paid for a conservation lab to completely organize them and restore them, leading to our microfilm project. Below that is the notarial archives located in Valletta that were recently discovered in 2007 because they were buried in a cistern well that had been abandoned during World War II in order to protect them from destruction. Malta was, per capita and per land space, the most heavily bombed place in World War II, even greater than the combined of Nagasaki and Hiroshima through just standard bombing. The notarial records were buried over 500 meters under solid limestone, yet still at that time we were pulling out the volumes. You can see the shrapnel from the bombs piercing the volumes even at that depth. And we have been doing work in Malta on this. But even here in the United States, we have problems with why manuscripts matter. And in Washington, D.C., after Hurricane Sandy, the Catholic University Library suffered tremendously with the roof being severely damaged. We did several digitization projects there, particularly focusing on their medieval and early modern collections, because even at that time we were still working under blue tarps in their rare book and manuscript collection because they lacked the funds in order to properly restore their own facility. So why does our collections matter? It's not simply war or climate change or destruction just because buildings catch on fire, but also because manuscripts are portable and therefore they become lucrative to sale. And in this case, here's a picture of eBay, where you can actually see a 17th century Ethiopian manuscript being put on sale, stolen from the country and being sold from Germany at this time. We have nothing we can do about it. We have no way of proving that it was stolen, but let's just say Germany is not the most common place one finds rare Ethiopian manuscripts. So this is, in a sense, why the Hill Museum Manuscript Library matters. We are more or less an organization dedicated to preserving the patrimony of humanity through its handwritten evidence. Why focus on manuscripts? Because manuscripts are unique. They hold not only the history of the person who made the manuscript, but the local community where the manuscript was made. Once destroyed, they can never be recovered. We have been working for over 50 years. We first began working with microfilm. If everybody have ever seen the original microfilm projectors, these large, tall stands, these big boxes with the glass case, and you would stamp down and do your shot. We did over 115,000 reels of microfilm between 1965 and 2000, right before the digital era. We did it throughout the world, including mostly in Europe, but also in South Africa, the United States, and Ethiopia. Why did we look at these countries? Again, first and foremost, it was thought of to be a kind of a Benedictine heritage project. So focusing on Europe made most sense because this is where the Benedictine monastic communities come from, being founded in Italy in the 6th century. But we moved to other places in the 1970s that we thought might be vulnerable for conflict. So we started in Spain in 1973 because Franco was at the end of his life. We didn't know whether or not Spain was going to descend into another civil war, which had catastrophic consequences on libraries and manuscript heritage. We also went to Ethiopia because Ethiopia was coming to the end of Emperor Haile Selassie's regime. And there was an idea that Ethiopia could collapse, and it in fact did collapse as part of the decolonization movements that took place during the 1960s and 1970s. Malta became independent. It was formerly a British colony and became independent in 1964. And our work in Malta in the 1970s was largely trying to figure out what might happen to Malta given its strategic location between Europe and Africa. No one really knew where the island was going to go politically, and it certainly lacked the infrastructure to do its work. South Africa, of course, also falls into that same ground. So early on, you can see this real idea to preserve the world's manuscript heritage. Starting in 2003, microfilm, which is fantastic for preserving records because it can last for almost 500 years if it's properly stored, but it's also a bit slow and difficult to develop. And so we moved into digital technology because of its speed and with the ability to retape the raw images. I can be a little technical later on, but let's just say the ability to retape these images over and over again that can lead to a perpetual quality of the color digital record. So starting in 2003, following our mission, we went to the Middle East, with our first projects being located in Lebanon, which has since the 1980s been a place suffering from continuous social turmoil, both from intercommunal violence and also external violence coming into the country through civil war and international wars. At that point, we started picking up projects in Syria and Iraq. Malta became the longest standing digitization preservation project in the world, as it had adopted digital projects. But we also returned to other places like Ethiopia and did some work there, and in Central Europe, like in the Ukraine and Bulgaria, not knowing what might happen after the end of and the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. So all of these projects are going, and as you can see from this kind of odd map of the world, that you can see here to the left is the United States, and all the way over the right is China. We are now a worldwide organization working on every continent with the exception of Antarctica and South America. So at this point, we have worked in over 550 libraries worldwide, have digitized nearly 10.5 million digital images, and have over 125,000 reels of microfilm located at. We are, at this point, the largest collection of manuscripts in the world, and we have international scholars coming to see us all the time. So how do we go about doing it? I'm talking about what we do and why we do it, but what is it and how we go about doing it? First and foremost, and I'll tell you, it's people like you. And I'm saying this in all honesty. I work with local historical societies, local parishes, throughout the world, primarily in Italy and Malta and France for myself, but it's with people, and we meet them and we look at their collections. It might seem that we might be working with state archives or big national archives, but no, in reality our mission is to the most vulnerable collections. So we work with those that have extreme historical interest and are mostly vulnerable without state protection. And we meet people and we discuss with them about their collections and seeing whether or not we can form a partnership. Once that partnership is done, in many instances we do provide some form of curatorial support to help preserve their collections. So in Malta, for example, we provide assistance with cleaning the manuscripts, helping organize their collections. The Confraternity of Charity, where I'm working at right now, has one member left in the confraternity, and he's in his 80s, and he's completely unable to handle a collection that dates back to the 16th century. Over 500 volumes of archival material, if you can imagine. And in this instance, we will help them prepare the manuscripts for digitization. In Iraq, with partnerships with several organizations in France and with the Dominican Friars, they have their own conservation lab that they do their work. And in Bamako, supported by several international organizations, including the Prince Claus Fund in Arcadia, they are preparing and cleaning and organizing over 400,000 manuscripts in preparation for digitization. We supply all of the equipment. We pay for it all. Everything that is done, we pay local people and we train them. None of this is being done by Americans going to these countries to do the work. We train and provide the equipment for local people and pay them a high-quality salary so that they can not only get all of the training to do this work after they leave, but also have the equipment there to continue the projects even after we're done with our particular instance. This is extremely important because it avoids all of these 19th century problems of cultural appropriation and allows people to recognize that they themselves are the ones who are actually doing the work, preserving their own culture. We're simply providing the funds and the means for them to do so. But it is extremely important to recognize that this is a local operation being done by local people preserving their own culture. We simply provide the tools and the long-term storage for their materials. So in that instance, how does it really work? People, again, are really the cornerstone from us. Most of our funding comes from private donors and private foundations. We also get some governmental grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities, but these are really small in comparison to our private foundations and private donors. And also, we do have an endowment. Thankfully, the Malta Study Center has a perpetual endowment to do its work, and the Hill Museum Manuscript Library is trying to build a full endowment so that it can continue its work in perpetuity. The library is located at St. John's University, which gives us international recognition and access to the best scholars to make use of our collections. If you haven't been there recently, I suggest coming. If you have access to the brand new American Library Association magazine, our library was featured in it, both Alcoa Library and the Hill Museum, because it is really an architectural treasure and wonder. We now have full space, scholar studies, classrooms, and facilities to do really outstanding work. It's really a remarkable environment. We're holding international symposiums now. We had a major NEH grant summer symposium on the Mediterranean that was funded in June. We also had 2 years ago a major seminar on Mediterranean studies focusing on magic, medicine, and technology. We're now becoming a major center for research and study. During the summer, we're also becoming a place to teach people about our collections. I know probably within the local historical society, particularly with genealogy, you actually have to provide a lot of service for people to use those records. We're now doing that every summer now too. So foreign language studies in Syriac and Armenian are now there. We've also done Latin. This is becoming a major component part of our work. 4, 5, 6 weeks, fully funded scholarships for people to come and do their work there so that there's no barrier to knowledge. Thanks for the new construction. We're also building major new exhibitions. It's something we can actually talk about as local. And Anne Marie and I as curators can get together and think about it, because curators love to talk about how to use space. That's what we do. We have beautiful exhibition spaces. Right now we have one on Mediterranean encounters, but we've also had one on the Reformation, celebrating the 500th anniversary of the nailing of the theses on the walls in Wittenberg. And we have some on, let's see, the next one we have coming up is on Benedictine prayer for the fall, and another one on slavery, American slavery, in the spring. So these great exhibitions, and we also make them transportable, so we can actually host and take our exhibitions throughout Minnesota and the United States and internationally. Most importantly, we are about access, and as museum support and museum staff, you know that museums and archives and historical societies don't matter unless you can get access to the records. That's the goal. You got to provide the space, you got to provide the materials. Part of my job as the coordinator of digital humanities projects is building the online access for our research. Currently, we have nearly 50,000 manuscripts in our new virtual environment. Nearly 30,000 of them are digitized. In the course of the next 5 years, we should have over 100,000 digitized manuscripts throughout the world available to the public. And building that major digital infrastructure, which encompasses over 30 languages, by the way, is a major part of our goal. And I can just tell you right now, creating a database that can handle 30 distinct languages is not the easiest thing in the world, but it's a lot of fun to accomplish these goals. So I suggest that you try it out. Go to vhimmel.org, virtualhimmel.org. It's free to register, and it's a wonderful resource to take a look at things. Most importantly, as a part of our page, is it's more than just an online catalog. It's also a learning environment. So we provide a place where people can study how to use manuscripts, how to learn the language skills to read other languages like Latin and Syriac, and we're going to be adding other languages to that. We also provide a database for lexicon for words, and also a reference area so people can find articles and books about the things in our collection. So it's a comprehensive environment helping all researchers at all levels learn about our collections. And This week we're actually launching a new part of the page, so it's hard to see here, but it's actually quite beautiful. The new reading room that'll be launched on Tuesday also allows quick and easy access to topics. So maybe you're not a scholar, but what you're interested in manuscripts from Iraq. You can just simply choose one of the kind of the handy buttons, and it'll do the auto search for you. Then you can find the things that you want without having to be an expert in how to do it. So we're really trying to cater to multiple audiences in our work, making sure that these collections are accessible. This is just me trying to show off the pretty manuscript, but it's kind of faded out a little bit, so you can go on to the next one. This one is a beautiful one that I'm just going to talk about the importance of our work just briefly. This manuscript's actually from the 13th century. It's gilded. It means everything that you see kind of light is actually solid gold painted on the page. It's a Bible. It's actually just the Gospels. It's the Gospels part of the Bible. But what's fascinating about this is it's written both in Coptic and Arabic. The large main writing is written in Coptic, used by the Coptic Church, and on the right is the translation in Arabic. Because for the parish priest in the community, the official language of the church, of course, is Coptic. On the other hand, he's going to need the Arabic in order to speak to the parishioners. And it's a wonderful idea of the blending of cultures, showing that communities are working together and communicating in distinct languages, but also other languages at the same time. Another one that I want to kind of show is, from a historian's perspective, this manuscript here on the left is actually in Syriac. It's one of the most important manuscripts that we found as part of our digitization project. The manuscript, the object itself, actually dates to the 16th century. The original writing goes back to the 12th century. It's the lone record of the Syrian version of what took place during the First Crusade. And it's written by Michael the Syrian. So it's from Syria, so we call him Michael the Syrian. But it gives the perspective of what he thought about all of these Christians coming to the Middle East during the First Crusade as a Christian already living there, wondering what's happening and what are they doing and why are they doing this stuff, because it's making life really hard for us. He wasn't actually a big fan of what was happening going on. This comes from my collection. It's probably one of the most exciting documents I like to show. At the top, it's hard to see, but the top is actually in Arabic. It's really particularly important because it's a local historical record. It's in the Confraternity of Charities archives. No different than like if you had a local Knights of Columbus here. Same type of archive, just located in Malta, in Valletta. This document comes from the 18th century. At the top, you will notice it's in Arabic. This is a notarial seal right here. The seal of a notary. Why is the notary sealing it in Arabic? Because the document's actually being executed in Tunisia. And it's being executed by the leader of Tunisia called the Bey of Tunis, who had at one point captured a Spaniard. The text here in the center is in Spanish, and it is from the Redemptorist order. It's an order dedicated to redeeming Christian slaves who had been captured in the seas as piracy was rampant in the Mediterranean during the 18th century. And the Christian was made into a slave. His family found out about it, raised the money to purchase him back. At the bottom, you see the Maltese Confraternity of Charity making a note because they were the ones who were given the money and the letter from Spain, which they then took to Tunis and worked with the Consul General of Sweden, who had established a consulate in Tripoli, and his is on the backside, his notification. So you get 4 different nations all working in one single page. This is a fragment. A lot of you might find most manuscripts are complete books, but a lot of what we actually encounter are fragments of lost, bound volumes. In this case, this is a fragment of parchment from the 11th and 12th century from the Church of the 40 Martyrs, and it's one of the earliest full-page miniatures from Syriac Christianity. And so even the scrap can be some of the most important art historical evidence that you have from the region, dating back, at this point, almost 1,000 years. Not everything we have is religious, nor is it all legal. In this case, this unfortunately faded out images, this beautiful treatise on anatomy from 18th century in Armenian. And anatomy, of course, at that day had not gone through the scientific revolution in Armenia. And so all of the surgery is being principled upon astrological signs like Scorpio and Pisces and Virgo, which is on my side. And so your surgical procedures and the methods would, of course, be dictated based upon what was taking place in the heavens, not just what was taking place in your physical body, because your body and its humors would respond to whether it was going to be a hot day or a cold day, where the moon was, where the Mars was, where Venus was. And so this is a whole treatise letting you know, can we do that gallbladder removal or not? And the last thing I'll talk about before I take any questions from you is that we are also home of the St. John's Bible. And again, I highly encourage you to come and take a look at it. The St. John's Bible is the first complete, fully illuminated manuscript Bible completed since the Middle Ages, done here in Minnesota. It has a brand new gallery. And for those who are even interested just in curatorial space and gallery space, my colleague Tim Turnes, who's the curator of the St. John's Bible, has produced, in my opinion, one of the most spectacular exhibit spaces in the United States today. It could be at any major metropolitan museum, whether it's New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, it doesn't matter. It is breathtaking to behold what he's done as a designer. You can see it here. The pages were never bound in the Bible. In fact, so he decided that since the pages in the Bible were never bound, he's going to make them float in the air. And also the glass is designed so that there's no reflection anywhere you stand within the museum. So you can walk in, and I dare you to try to get a camera with a reflection. It's near impossible. And again, the pages literally just float in the air. It's really spectacularly done. And because Tim is a spectacular curator, not only in design but also in education, it gives you a full history of what it means to actually illuminate a manuscript, how it was done over the history of time, and what it means to do it today in a modern world where we're so used to producing things in the Ethernet or the internet or on a phone, but actually to sit down and over a decade produce something solely by hand that will last. Parchment can last forever. And finally, just the last little thing, do come in if you feel like making a tour. Tim will be more than welcome to set it up for you. It's a nice way of providing promotion for yourselves and getting some people together. We're not that far away. I think we're about an hour and 10 minutes maybe, so please do come down. And with that, I'll just simply say thank you very much for your time.
If anyone has questions, please do ask him, and I'm just thrilled that we have this resource right here in central Minnesota, not very far away. We're doing important work here.
Yes, sir.
I would think the most difficult part of that is organizing. I mean, you walk into a place with 1,000 or more documents. How do you organize?
This is both the question is how is it that we organize a project, particularly a larger project that may include anywhere from 500 to 1,000 records. I'm going to speak to you personally as a curator because my job as the Malta Study Curator is to organize the projects in Malta. So I am a field director as much as I am working locally in St. John's. It can only be done in some respects because of today's technology. If I had to do this 30 years ago, I wouldn't be here today, I'd be in Malta. That's just a fact. You need highly skilled curators like Anne-Marie on site in order to do this work. They have to be trained archivists or trained curators to recognize the collection because a lot of it has to be allocated. I have long days, so I'm usually up around 4 in the morning and I'm on Skype or on FaceTime, and my site director, Claudia Garradas, who is a professional curator, may be in showing me stuff through the phone so that we can make decisions on what's being done. So it's a day-to-day. I'm doing this 6 days a week, 12 hours a day in order to get this done. From the basic principle is we have to go there, we have to establish the collection. First thing we have to do in most instances is fumigate it. A lot of this stuff is severely damaged by insects, particularly bookworms and other forms, so we have to fumigate the collection. Then we have to clean the collection, Then we have to prepare it for digitization. Preparation itself can take anywhere from 6 to 9 months, and then beyond going through the rest of the digitization project. The Confraternity of Charity project will take nearly 2 years to do 500 volumes. And on a really, really, really good day, digitization itself can take, you know, 1,000 folio manuscript. You gotta remember, this stuff isn't like small little things. These are volumes that can be this thick of notarial documents, all bound in a single volume, and not all the pages are the same size. So you might have a piece of paper that big, and then a piece of paper that big, and then it changes each size. I have professional photographers to do the work. I hire skilled, trained photographers to do it, and it's a lot of time and a lot of love. It's no different than what you guys do here on a daily basis. It's just international in that scope. So I don't know if I'm really kind of in a brief answering your question, but the general principle is clean, organize, prepare, digitize, and then the last thing I'm going to say, and I hope I get a smile out of my co-curator in the back, you got to catalog it. And cataloging takes a long time.
Do you ever have problems with the infrastructure in the countries? I mean, like I've lived overseas, and sometimes, you know, the telephone lines, the internet, it's not the same as here.
I wish I had my colleague Wayne Torborg here, who could talk about how they trucked a Honda generator over flimsy boats and camels in the middle of Ethiopia to a remote monastery where they set up a digitization studio to digitize the oldest known Ethiopian gospel in the world, and it's rather remarkable. In Malta, I got a problem with 220 voltage, and so my lights, I first started using strobes, and I had to go to constant lighting because my strobes kept blowing up, and you don't want strobes blowing up in a library full of paper. It's just a bad thing. The hard part about me is that these collections are theirs, and so once the digitization's done, I can't do anything about that. I've written reports on how to preserve it. I've told them they need to relocate it, but that takes money. In the confraternity charity stuff, it's located, if you can imagine in your mind, a 4-story church, and then the bell tower. The archive is located at the top of the bell tower with exposure to the elements in 104-degree temperatures with 95 to 100% humidity, 300 days a year. And I'm watching faces, you know. And that's why we're doing the work, because this is also iron gall ink, and so the stuff is just corroding before my eyes. I have pictures of stuff. I could pick up the book and the binding just falls off. But all I can do is say, please, I've written reports, but it's their stuff. I got lots of those stories. There's an Indiana Jones quality to it, trust me. Unfortunately, when our work usually works with people contacting us, and also us contacting prospective clients, or partners, I should say. After the fact, there's nothing we really can do. And our funding is also limited by our donors. So in some instances where, let's say an organization is really interested in doing work in Iraq, well then we have to use those funds in Iraq. We can't allocate that somewhere else, even though that there might be an urgent need. We are always open for business, and if people know about places or have the money to do it, we certainly will do our best if it fits within our mission to provide that work. I have to turn down things too often, and we do manuscripts. We don't really do printed collections, so collections that have printed books generally fall outside our scope. And so even though you might have a collection of printed books that go back 500 years, to maintain focus on our primary mission of manuscripts, we tend to say no to those collections more often than not, except in very, very rare circumstances. Trust me, you know, there are places in Italy and Spain that I'm aware of that I would do. There are even collections in the United States that I would do if I had the opportunity to do it. If I can fall into my remit, I would do it.
You talked about Syria. How were you able to work with them? How was Hill Museum?
So the Syria project began before the war. That's the first thing to say. And it was actually Brigham Young University who started digitization in Syria. And they decided to hand the project over to us when we became the logical successors because of our size and our experience to do the work. And I think they wanted to move to another part of the region. I'm not quite clear about that, but they did hand it over to us. We haven't worked in Syria since the war broke out. And there are a couple of collections we don't even know if they exist anymore. There's a good chance that they were totally destroyed. But we haven't been able to get into Aleppo or into Homs to find out. It's simply too dangerous. We have hope to go back. We certainly want to go back. The question is, when is it going to be safe enough? And it could be another 2 to 3 years before that happens. And then if politics change, who knows if even if an American organization would be let back into the country, given how the war is shaken out because of international politics. That's something that always has to be taken into consideration. We're very lucky to have done what we've done, I can tell you that.
I'm wondering if Syrians who will go back to their home once they're safe will ask for...
That'll be an interesting question. I mean, one of the things that I always think about with regard to our projects that involve what we'll call communities in exile, and refugee communities, is that, it's hard for me to talk about this, but in effect, we're their library now, because they're never going to get access to this stuff again. And I'm thinking about not this generation, but I'm thinking about the next generation and the generation after that. And I'm speaking to people here who do genealogy, and I have a lot of people who are exiled communities from Malta who left in 1948 because the country was just devastated in World War II. And they live in Australia, in Canada, and the United States. And I'm their repository because it's difficult for them to get back to Malta. These families are going to look at us as their local archive, as their local library. And we've got to think about it not simply at the high academic end. We've got to think about it as a local end, because we are preserving the culture of people who may never have access to it except through these images. And they might be the only thing that exists today. And to go back to the beginning, as a historian, and speaking to other historians, the hardest part of my job is making the decision of, in the end, what collection's next. Because you don't know what disaster will happen. And in the end, what collection I preserve might be the history that is known. And so do I preserve the collection in the Royal Library? Or do I preserve the local historical society documents? The Royal Library might preserve the great art history of the nation. The local might preserve the fact that there were once slaves farming in that community. And that decision can actually make history in a way that we know we don't want it to necessarily be made. And that's a burden I carry with me all the time when I choose what to do. Climate change is a big deal, I'm not going to lie. It's a big deal for two reasons. First, it's probably the understated source of most regional and international conflict today, even though people don't want to talk about it, because the fact of the matter is people need to drink water, people need to eat, and there's a lot of places in the world that don't have enough of that, so people are on the move, and that causes conflict. People moving also carry books with them, which they sell on eBay because they need money. So climate change affects us in a very practical way. From the standpoint of historical preservation, it takes a lot to properly preserve a manuscript in a proper climately controlled facility with proper fire standards. And I can tell you right now, there isn't a single repository in Malta that has it. Not one. And the National Library doesn't have it. The National Archives doesn't have it. There are regional libraries in Spain and Italy that don't have it. And when you see these collections just simply disintegrating because of the climate, it's a very powerful thing to witness, knowing this stuff is just disappearing before your eyes. So, for my sake right now, I've got opportunities to work in different places, and I have to make a choice, and some of it is based upon climate. And I have to does that facility deserve greater attention because of the way the documents are even stored or not? So yes, it affects what we do.
Do you have certain priorities as far as subject matter of the archives or the manuscripts?
It's one of my favorite questions to be asked. I'm glad it's being asked. The question is whether or not we have a priority over what type of collections that we work in libraries or archives. The answer is the best thing about libraries and archives and about books in general is that they don't care who their readers are. And so one of the things that I always try to tell people is that when I do a library, it's got in it what's in it. And they could have Arabic manuscripts or Christian manuscripts, it could have art, it could have science, it could have legal documents. So in the one sense, I like to answer that question first and foremost because it's important to recognize that it's the collections that we're interested in, not necessarily in a tradition. We are interested in vulnerable communities and vulnerable collections. And in the Middle East in the last decade, that has largely been, let's say, what we would call marginal Islamic communities. Shiites, for example, in some regions are discriminated against heavily. Sufis also have problems. But we also work with Chaldean Christians and Syriac Orthodox Christians and also Armenian Christians. So it's communities that are vulnerable and their collections that are vulnerable that most interest us. The Timbuktu collection is an Islamic collection, but it's highly vulnerable. When I say Islamic collection, again, I want to say that that's just because it's located in largely Islamic family libraries. But the contents of it can be anything from its regional history that goes all the way from its trade with Europe and Asia all the way down. So I never really think about it as a kind of a tradition. Within the Malta Study Center, I work on Malta and the Order of the Knights of Malta. That's the mandate of the endowment. So I am focused on those collections. I simply can't go off and do a regional library in Spain unless it has something to do with it. But the Hill Museum as an institution works with partners that have collections that speak to each other based upon the geographic need and how it works with collections. Right now we have potential projects in Nepal. We have projects ongoing in India. We have projects in Yemen, Mali, but we also have projects in Europe. We might be starting a new one in Italy soon. We have some in the Balkans right now, and I believe one in Ukraine, and of course Malta. So all of these collections, it's kind of how they fit into us and how they work together. And in the end, I will say this with a big smile on my face, because this is an annual meeting. Also depends on where the money is, because we are a nonprofit organization. And so if someone from Mexico said, we've got this beautiful manuscript collection and we've got the money to digitize it or a funder to do it, we would probably look at it very seriously. We just haven't looked at Latin America because it hasn't fit into the kind of European, Middle Eastern, North African world where our primary work has been since the 1960s. Thank you very much. Please take all of these things home with you. I hope you enjoy them.
Thank you, Dr. Gullo, and happy birthday on Monday. Okay, I want to thank all of you for coming out. This is the end of our program. Please do help yourself to treats and mingle a little bit around here and talk to each other, get to know each other. But once again, thank you so much for your support of the Morrison County Historical Society.